Well, good morning if you are in Los Angeles, California. Good afternoon if you're in Atlanta, Georgia, Cincinnati, Ohio, New York City, or Boston. Good evening if you're in Milan at La Scala. Greetings to people all over the world. Welcome to Fred Plotkin on Fridays on Adagio, the place where classical music happens. As you know, Adagio is a video and audio streaming platform dedicated to supporting artists and to making classical music and opera available to fans all around the world. While this broadcast is being seen in February of 2025, we're recording on January 20th of 2025 for a couple of reasons. One is my guest, my wonderful guest, the gentleman I've been wanting to talk to for a long time, is, in my view, the hardest working man in opera. And therefore, to get him to sit down for time, the willingness is there, but he's very much in demand. So that's Morris Robinson, whom I'll introduce in a moment. But another thing is today, January 20th of 2025, we celebrate the life and work of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who is from Atlanta. And if anything else is happening in the world today, I'm not cognizant of it. So Morris Robinson, bass, Morris Robinson, as people quickly discover. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah.
So one of the first things I wanted to talk to you about is your hometown of Atlanta, which happens to be the hometown also of Martin Luther King. I should give you my background a bit on Atlanta for context. I've only been there once, and I was there for a week. And I can tell you the dates, May 19th to May 24th of 1986. And the reason was that was the last tour of the Metropolitan Opera.
Oh, wow.
And I was working at the Met, but my job was never involved with touring. It involved in working in the opera house. So when the opera company went out on tour, I stayed behind. I never got to experience the tour. And I requested of the then general manager, Bruce Crawford, that for my knowledge and history, I really should spend a week on the Met tour to know it well. And the Met went to Boston and Cleveland and Minneapolis and other cities. Everyone without exception said to me, you need to do it in Atlanta. That's the only city where you will really get a sense of the Met tour. So that's why I know exactly when I was there. And I'll tell you the operas the Met did. Tosca with Grace Bumbry,
Oh,
Cavaliere
wow.
Americana and Pagliacci, then L'Italiana and Algeri, then Aida with Leona Mitchell, and then Carmen with Grace Bumbry again, La Traviata with Barbara Daniels, and Romeo and Juliet with John Fowler and Monique Baudouin, who I do not know. I guess I didn't go to that performance. But what I can tell you, Morris, is that although it has been 36 years or 38 years since I've been in Atlanta, it made a very strong impression on me. It's not that I had a preconception, but I found people incredibly welcoming. I found the city very disorienting because everything was named Peachtree, and I couldn't figure out where I was going. I really didn't understand the geography at all. I made a point of going to, I guess it's called the Martin Luther King District, and visited Ebenezer Baptist Church. I went to a restaurant that changed my life called Pascal's that had rather wonderful food. So that when Pascal's opened at Atlanta Airport, I think in Terminal B, I would make a point if I was going elsewhere in the United States to connect in Atlanta through Terminal B to stop at Pascal's, where every time I go through there, they remember me from the time before, and they always say, "How's your mama?" And one time I was going home to New York, and they sent me home with peach cobbler for my mother. That's
Nice.
fine. This is for your mother.
Right.
Um, so the warmth of the people, the hospitality, the energy of Atlanta really stuck in my head. I know I can only imagine that it's changed radically in the past 38 years. Um, there was an Olympics for one thing, but another thing is that it didn't really have much of an opera company, and now it has an opera company headed by Tomer Zvulun that's ranked in the top 10 in the United States. And the reason that Atlanta, but not only didn't have an opera company, is that the Met came through on tour every year. And it was such a big occasion that it sort of, Cleveland is another example of this. It never created the environment for building an opera company that a city like eventually Los Angeles had, because the Met didn't go there. Los Angeles came late, 1982, 84. But nonetheless, the Met, when it went to places, tended to sort of quash. Boston's another example, the real growth of an opera company in a city that otherwise we'd expect to have it. Atlanta has a great symphony orchestra, but somehow it didn't before have an opera company.
Right.
So if you would talk to me about growing up in Atlanta, your awareness of opera, did I leave anything out in describing Atlanta? I'd love to know, because it's a city I admire from afar.
Yeah, the time that you were there in '86, I was doing the math. I was a junior in high school, and at the Northside School of Performing Arts, which is in its own right became internationally known. We were the operation that had the Cocosite Kids. We did Coke commercial jingles. We had a touring company that did like a variety show of Broadway hits and tunes, and we would go to national meetings for IBM or 3M, or we go to Silicon Valley. We went to Belgium, Brussels, Belgium, Paris, and London every year as a spring break tour. So the arts are really big there. As a young kid, the Woodruff Art Center is where the Atlanta Symphony was, and we took a trip every year to the Atlanta Symphony. I remember going there as early as first grade, second grade, hearing the Flight of the Bumblebee and Robert Shaw just talking to us and kind of inspiring us. It was really part of the curriculum to expose us to that. So opera, not so much, as you well pointed out. There was not much of an opera presence that I was aware of, at least. But the Atlanta Symphony was already a world class operation and had won several Grammys and done lots of wonderful work under the direction of Robert Shaw. But yeah, the warmth. I'm from Atlanta. I'm from the South. Most of my family is from the South. I always say Atlanta is like a big city with small city type charm. At least in that era it was when I grew up there. My mother is from Atlanta, born and raised. Grew up not too far from where Dr. King, his church was, and where he grew up. My dad is from Hazelhurst, Georgia, but he moved to Atlanta when he was 12 or 13 years old, right off of Martin Luther King Drive. So I'm very much an Atlanta native. I grew up in Ben Hill, Zone 4. Went to elementary school at Fickett Elementary School. Went to Sarah Smith Elementary School in Buckhead, part of the first busing program. I was in the first busing program in Atlanta that went minority to majority program, where Black kids from my side of town were bused to the better schools, if you will, the white side of town. So I'm very much Atlanta. That warmth, that Southern hospitality, unlike the rest of Georgia, Atlanta had that, So I had a very, I think I had a very good upbringing because of the diversity I was exposed to. It was nothing for me to, I never knew Atlanta not to have a Black mayor. They've always had a Black mayor. I always knew Black doctors. I always knew Black lawyers. I always knew Black politicians. Atlanta was always that place. But when we went to school out in Buckhead, we met the other side. And I think at an early age, those kids, along with ourselves, were duly educated in that we learned a lot about one another. There was a lot of mutual respect. It was harder for the parents to grasp it, but it was much easier for the kids. And because of the kids, the parents became even more familiar with one another. So it was just a great environment to get an overall education, culture, welcoming, acceptance, belonging. So I was really appreciative to have grown up in that town. So yeah.
You were born, if I'm correct, about a year after the death of Martin Luther King.
You're right, yeah.
So he died April 4th of 1968.
Correct.
Which I once met Maya Angelou and I asked her about that. And it turned out that was her 50th birthday.
Oh, wow.
April 4th of 1968. So therefore, her awareness of that directly related to her own experience of wanting to celebrate something big that day,
right.
But how the world changed. You just said something that sort of caught my ear, and I think it's important that we continue on. We have listeners all over the world on this program, not just in the United States. and you use the words minority and majority. And in the world, the majority are people of color.
Right.
And in the United States, we often use the word minority to refer to people who are not white.
Right.
But they're not necessarily black. They might be Asian, all kinds of things, but not white.
Right.
From what I know about Atlanta, it is a city in which, quote, the minority is actually the majority.
Yes.
And therefore, there may be a few other cities in America like that. Philadelphia may come close, and maybe Detroit comes close. But I think that Atlanta is maybe New Orleans, but Atlanta is the shining model of a city that is world class, that runs famously well, that is black administered primarily, that also has the legacy of Martin Luther King. And Martin Luther King having been a political figure, but also a religious figure, a person who was my hero, who gives definition to all kinds of things that I care about. And he was very prescient in a lot of ways, and spoke about things 50 and 60 years ago that we're still, unfortunately, talking about now. And there have been many digressions from his original thought and developments and different movements, all of which is fine. My current hero is named Reverend William Barber, and he is, I don't know if you know him, he's North Carolina, so nobody's perfect, but he is a magnificent, in my view, a magnificent religious political figure. No one will ever be Martin Luther King, but William Barber is really something. And I think that he embodies many of the values of Martin Luther King. But therefore, Atlanta, I would like you to tell me, because as I said, I've only been there once. I think in many ways is the realization of the vision of Dr. King, at least in one large city.
Yeah, I would agree with you there, and that's why I said what I said earlier. My growing up in Atlanta empowered me, and I didn't realize until I left Atlanta and moved to, of all places, St. Paul, Minnesota, that we were really a minority. And then it was like, whoa, this is okay. I get what they're saying now, because Atlanta is its own thing. It's unique. I mean, you can say Charlotte, Detroit, Los Angeles, if you will, Chicago, Dallas, but Atlanta is it. And within that beltway, within that city, and even some of the outskirts, our presence is very, very well known, very well felt, and we kind of run everything. And I'm sure a lot of it has to do with the Southern Christian Leadership Council being based there, the civil rights being based there, because of Martin Luther King and all the other wonderful people we have there, Maynard Jackson, Andrew Young, Ralph David Abernathy. I can go on and on and on. Hosea Williams, so many, John Lewis,
John Lewis, yeah.
Countless, Julian Bond, yeah. Atlanta was it. And I'm not saying that I was ill prepared for the rest of the world, because once you walk outside of Atlanta, remember, I lived in Minneapolis, I lived in New Hampshire, I moved to New York, I went to school in South Carolina. So I had the wake up call in that was not the reality or the norm, but I was so well prepared, just from my upbringing at home, but also just being a part of the culture where I'm from, that there was nothing I could not accomplish. Because in Atlanta, every facet of life that one could possibly want to accomplish had already been an example to me as a young kid. So, and you talk about Grace Bumbry being there for Tosca, was it? Or
yeah,
who was
Tosca and Carmen.
Okay, and then it was oh my God, you said who did Aida that year?
Leona Mitchell,
who I remember from her very famous Liu Turandot recording
Aida,
with Domingo. Yeah. But and I didn't know that then, but it would not have been. I mean, Matta Will Dobbs is from Atlanta. Jesse Norman's from Augusta.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or she said Augusta.
Augusta, yes, but yeah, she developed an accent. I don't know quite where she got that from, but she's from Augusta. But again, there is nothing that in my mind, was insurmountable because of the environment in which I was raised. So very much true what you're saying, and why I chose when I was living in New York City as a young artist. Once I had a kid, decided to move back to Atlanta because I wanted to raise him in Atlanta. I didn't want to raise him in New York, and I certainly didn't want to take him back to New Hampshire. I wanted him to grow up in Atlanta, Georgia, so we have an identity of that, exactly who he was. So,
so something you just said chimes. I knew Jesse Norman. I worked with her a lot, and I can't say anyone could ever really know Jesse Norman, but one could be proximate to Jesse Norman and learn from her and observe her and so forth. But she once said something to me that she then wrote in her memoir, that as growing up as a young girl and woman in Augusta, Georgia, with brothers, that she did not see herself as a Black person, but as a woman. And that there were Black people around and non-Black people, but that was not the issue. But that the issue was, as a woman, her family, in effect, said to her, well, you can't be a doctor because, you're a girl, and girls don't do science, but you can sing, Jesse, so maybe you want to look at that. And Jesse Norman, the one I knew, was always interested in science, in philosophy, and things like that. And she was discouraged not because she was Black, because her environment was a largely Black middle-class environment, but because she was a female.
Oh, wow.
And that's what she carried with her much of her life, was as a woman rather than as a Black person. Yes, there were occasions, but it was really more in her life that it was as a woman. That's what, quote, kept her down. It didn't keep her down, but it gave her more of a challenge to stand up to that than to being perceived as Black.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's experience is different, and far be it for me to talk about the goddess of mezzo sopranos, who I have a lot of respect for, and I actually participated in her Arna Festival when I sang with her at Carnegie Hall years ago. But I mean, everyone's experience is different, and I wouldn't know it from a female's perspective, obviously. But I knew Black judges that were female and doctors that were female and lawyers that were female when I was growing up. So, but like I said, everyone's experience is different, and Augusta, even though close proximity to Atlanta, is still not Atlanta. My best friend is actually from Augusta, Georgia. We were talking yesterday. We were actually just talking yesterday. He was speaking of how I'm from Atlanta. He's from the small town of Augusta. But, we're talking about where we are in our lives, from whence we've come. And he made a distinction that he was not from Atlanta, but Augusta, a small town. But, yeah, I mean, I can't speak intelligently about that. But I can certainly understand that during those times, and of course she's older than I am, that may have been a barrier that was placed in front of her mentally. And therefore, she took a different route than pursuing her science. That being said, I'm glad she became an opera singer.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's pretty amazing.
Now, you could have been a football player, but we're going to get to that in a moment. Yesterday,
I was a football player, all right?
Yesterday, I was doing some research, as I do on all my guests, and the Metropolitan Opera has something called a performers report. In other words, how many performances one has done.
Okay.
And James Levine, I think, was second, and George Janovsky. There's certain singers who sang constantly. And what was his name? His real name was Caruso, but it was not Enrico Caruso.
Oh.
Charles Anthony from New Orleans sang.
Charles Anthony, of course.
Yeah, but his real name was Charles Anthony Caruso, and Rudolph Bing said, you cannot use Caruso here. You're going to be Charles Anthony. But anyway, Morris Robinson, as of yesterday, was tied with two singers at 127 performances. And the two singers were two of my very favorites with whom I worked, Shirley Verrett and Regine Crispin.
Really?
So it's a three-way tie now. Although the next time you sing, you're going to pull ahead, and you're going to catch up to people like Christine Gerke, who continues to sing there. But you're all sort of in that same cluster.
Are you serious? Me and Shirley Verrett are tied
right now? In front of you are Joan Sutherland and Birgit Nielsen, who are tied. It's interesting how they're tied. And Shirley Verrett and Regine Crispin, and for the moment, you are tied at 127 Met performances. We're going to get to that in a bit.
Wow.
But I said before that you're the hardest working man in opera. Not to be confused with James Brown, who was the hardest working man in show business. And
also from Augusta, Georgia.
Also from Georgia, as Little Richard, I think, was from that part of the world.
Yeah.
So it's an amazing thing. But you have sung in many of the greatest theaters in the world. You are artistic advisor to Cincinnati Opera. You are artist in residence at Atlanta Symphony. You are, I had to write these on numerous pages. You, is it State University of Georgia, Georgia State?
Georgia State University, yeah.
State University of Georgia, Artist in Residence School of Music.
Yeah.
In addition to running a career, being a proud father, I know about that, doing all kinds of things. Part of why, audience, we are recording ahead with Morris Robinson is because who knows where he will be when this is broadcast in February of 2025. So I'm very glad we got you. By the way, I believe you're in New York right now.
I am in New York, and I have a show tomorrow at the Met, which will put me ahead of show you're at, which is crazy. But yeah, something.
And Regine Crispin, I know.
Yes, yeah.
By the way, let's talk a little bit about what you're doing right now at the Metropolitan Opera, because by the time this is broadcast, you will have done it.
Yeah.
But you are in a new production of Aida that just opened on December 31st. And the original role that you were in was
Il Re.
the king.
Yeah.
But then one day I looked at my Met program and you were singing a different role, Ramphis.
Yes.
Because I guess the artist singing Ramphis dropped out, was ill or whatever. When is the last time you sang Ramphis, and can you easily switch back and forth between the king and Ramphis?
Well, apparently I can.
Role. Yeah.
I was at the final dress rehearsal, and I was dressed as the king with 12 minutes to go before curtain. And the Ramphis had 102 fever. So they sent him home, came to my dressing room and said, Morris, I know it's last minute, but if we need you to sing Ramphis, can you do it? I was like, sure. I said, if you need to sing both roles, I can sing them both because we don't sing at the same time. It's always been a party trick of mine. I go to rehearsal, if the king isn't there, I'll sing his role and vice versa. But I've sung more Ramphases now at this point in my career than I have King. The King was the very first thing I ever learned as an opera singer, the very first role I ever did in 1999. And while I was doing that, I was learning, simultaneously you learn another role because it's in your head all the time, it's in your ear. But I had just done Ramphis maybe 3 weeks on a one-night gala performance before we started at the Met. So it was still fresh in my mind. But they came back to my dressing room at 10 minutes before curtain and said, we need you to sing Ramphis right now. You got 10 minutes and we don't have a costume for you. So put on this black robe and go sing Final Dress. And so I ran out on stage. I start the opera off. I'm the first voice you hear. So I know the staging, but I don't know the staging. I just walk out and just start singing, Si corre voce. And I was okay. And it was on. And opening night, I switched back to the King. And it was apparent that Dimitri was not feeling really well, as well as the tenor. And so before the second show, they called the night before and said, Morris, you're on as Ramphis. Oh, we have a costume for you. So I seen the second show in full costume for the first time, ever wearing it for the second show. The third show, I found out about 4 o'clock before the curtain that I was not going to see King. I was going to see Ramphis. Fourth show, I found out about 3 o'clock that I was seeing Ramphis. And before the fifth show, they called me and said, Dimitri's pulling out and you're singing the rest of them. So it was kind of a relief because every day I woke up not knowing what role I was going to sing. And I was not well myself. We had a terrible bug going through the entire Met. And It went through my entire cast. And so while navigating that myself, covering for a very sick colleague, I felt mentally like, okay, if I'm singing the King today, I'll be fine. 2 scenes, I can do it. If I'm singing Ramphis today, it's going to be a problem. So I was always on edge. So finally, they let me know what I'm doing. So yeah, I'm doing Ramphis for the rest of the run, and I come back in May, which will be after this, so it is in the future. And I've seen the rest of the Ramphases then too.
So I went to what I think was the 3rd performance of the run.
Okay.
And so you had a different tenor than Piotr Bachava, who was ill on opening night and canceled next week. And because it's a new production by Michael Meyer and others, and I was very familiar with the old production that the Met had for more than 30 years.
Unkio.
I use my binoculars a lot to pick out details of the production. And if I'm correct, makeup was a particular feature in that Ethiopians had certain stripes over their head and nose, whereas religious Egyptians had no eyeshadow, but secular Egyptians had blue eyeshadow.
Correct. Yes.
So what I was asking myself about Morris, because I was watching you specifically, was do you get the blue eyeshadow? Do you not get the blue eyeshadow?
You know,
Was there
that's
not the time to think of the blue eyeshadow?
yeah. So when I did the dress rehearsal, I think I had blue eyeshadow on the black robe. Of course, opening, I had the blue eyeshadow on. When I took my pre-performance pictures and sent them out to my friends and family, the one question they all had was, "Where's your blue eyeshadow?" They liked it. I was so happy I didn't have to wear that anymore. In fact, Peter Gelb said that to me the other day. He says, "Morris, are you missing your blue hat?" I said, "No, I'm missing the blue eyeshadow, sir." We just laughed about it. But yeah, it's a different makeup. I'm a different character, obviously. I go from being the king, who is the absolute authority, but not really, to being Ramphis, who is the absolute authority, but not really. So, two different perspectives on how he looks at things. The king is very benevolent, trying to be fair. Ramphis is kill every last one of them. I'm done with this. So it's interesting, but yes, I'm able to flow back and forth between the two because of my familiarity with those roles individually and just the score. I've studied Aida for a long time, so yeah.
So just sort of something I never thought of before that you prompted in what you said. Arguably my favorite Verdi opera, although it changes, is Don Carlo. And in Don Carlo, there are two great bass roles, namely the King, King Philip, and the Grand Inquisitor. I know you played the Grand Inquisitor. And what you just said about Ramphis and the King, it's the same thing.
Same thing.
The King Philip of Spain may rule half the world, but he can't rule his own family. Whereas the Grand Inquisitor, who was blind, which is a metaphor there, is actually the one with the power.
Yes.
Ah.
Verdi did that a lot. I don't know what it says about his attitude towards the church or royalty, but it does in those two operas. And if you go to Nabucco, also Zaccaria, who's kind of the rabble rouser, he's a high priest.
Nabucco, yeah.
Yeah, Nabucco. The priest has all the power, and I think that's obviously that's where he saw things. But I think that King Filippo, and I was learning that role and about to do my first one in Dallas when the pandemic hit. I had just shown for rehearsals. But I think the line he says after that big duet scene is something that refers back to the head, the power of the king. The power of the throne always has to bow down to the church. Yeah. That's like his last line, I think. So it was written in the score that way. Obviously, the power goes that way. When you hear the roles, I love singing the Inquisitor because the Inquisitor, it's like king starts here, Inquisitor goes here, and everything. It's like everything you've seen, I can sing louder. Everything you've seen, I can sing higher. So even when the king is forcefully going full bore, the Inquisitor comes in and overpowers him musically, because that role has to be the most powerful in that scene. So it's kind of the way I like to
learn a role. Do you look back or listen back to older interpreters of the role? I'm thinking specifically of the Grand Inquisitor. Yeah. That the scariest one I ever saw was Jerome Hines, who was a deeply religious man.
Yes.
And therefore, he brought that to it. I can think of other wonderful
Hines and Pliska. That's how I learned it.
Right.
Hines and Pliska.
Because, for example, Ferruccio Furlanetto, at the beginning of his Met career, before doing The King, sang The Inquisitor. And
I learned Filippo from Furlanetto, and I just did my last one. He was my king, and I was the Inquisitor. Yeah. And you talk about being nervous. You talk about somebody like me who's used to being the man, the guy, the power. Yeah. I was losing sleep before I sang it with Furlanetto because I knew that voice and that characterization was just going to be immense and unflappable. And is it inflammable? Incomparable. He is just amazing. Yep. But I held my own, and he complimented me afterwards. In fact, he says that I was the best Inquisitor he ever sang with. So
he is very affectionate and caring toward younger artists.
Yeah.
I remember at the beginning of Quinn Kelsey's career, Quinn is in your cast as Amanandro and I. That Ferruccio, who's a friend of mine, so I call him by his first name, was singing Don Quixote in Toronto. His favorite role, and a role that he's never gotten to sing at the Met. And therefore, I went to Toronto to hear him do it. And the Dulcinea was Anita Rockville-Ishvili at the beginning of her career.
Wow.
And the Sancho Panza was Quinn Kelsey at the
Yeah.
beginning of his career. And Ferruccio had high praise for both of them, but he said to
Wow.
me, Quinn is my baby.
Oh, that's very nice.
And
Yeah,
he
well,
really took an interest in Quinn's career and forming his artistry and giving him advice. He's a wonderful colleague that way.
he's pretty amazing, and we had very few conversations about what he wanted from me. We just kind of organically allowed it to go, and the Inquisitor doesn't do a lot of gesticulation or interaction. He did tell me to grab him a few times. We became physical because the voices were so evenly matched with volume and intensity. He wanted to add to it. So by the end of that run, we were just locked in. It was really a wonderful experience. And I've been in shows with him before where I was like third tree from the right and he was singing the real world. But the first time I heard him sing, I was a young artist at the Met, and I used to sneak into rehearsals all the time. I was way up in the balcony because I'd heard he was coming. He was singing Figaro then. And I swear that was the moment I was convinced that either he was different than everyone else in the world or he had a microphone and speakers, because the way that voice cut through that house, it was intimidating to me. It was fascinating. So I did. I really was like, I got to go see the Inquisitor with this guy. Oh my God. I wanted it to happen. I wanted to be around it so I could really take in what he was doing technically and how he supported. And I watched him sing, and the guy, his breath and his support is so deep. And every time he phonates, his whole body vibrated. And I would just sit there and go, whoa. I'm grown at this point, but it's just, what an amazing artist, what an amazing singer. Yeah. Yeah. My favorite.
He was one of the last students of a teacher, or famous students, let's say, of a teacher who I came to know when I was a young student in Italy. I didn't study singing, but his name was Ettore Campogalliani, and he lived in Mantua, Mantova. And among his students were Renata Tebaldi, Morella Freni, Luciano Pavarotti, Ruggero Raimondi, Leo Nucci, and Ferruccio Furlanetto. So there's something about whatever he imparted. I asked Franny about him, and she said it was really not about breathing and technique; it was more about interpretation.
Wow.
But there must have been something that Campogalliani had that he was able to convey to these students, because each one of them was the greatest at what they did, practically.
My first Nabucco was with Leo Nucci when I was singing The High Priest of Baal, and Sam Raimi was singing Zaccaria, which is now what I've seen. And Leo Nucci was a small guy compared to me. The most legato singing I've ever heard in my life, and the most piercing full sound from such a small guy. So there had to be something more than just the interpretation, because mechanically, physiologically, they were able to produce sounds that no one else could do. And I just, I would love to get in some of that stuff, but
yeah,
amazing. Yeah.
Well, talk to Nucci and Raimondi and to Ferruccio.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't have Luciano Morella and Renata Tebaldi anymore, but talk to those three, because there must be something, and I've always wondered about Campogalliani, that he was able to really take those singers and make them all outstanding, or recognize what made them outstanding and bring it forth even more.
Yeah.
I want to circle back to, you said the first role you learned at the beginning of your career. We're talking about New England.
Yes.
Boston, Massachusetts. Do you know that there was a woman named Coretta Scott who was from the South, but she went to study to be an opera singer in Boston. And there was a young man named Martin Luther King who was crazy about her. And he moved to Boston to woo Coretta Scott. And she said to him, well, you're going to have to learn some opera because I want to be an opera singer. So it was opera that actually brought Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott together, and they married, and we know the rest of the story.
Yeah.
But you were not there, obviously, at the same time. But some of your earliest beginnings as an opera singer, not as a person, not as an athlete, we're going to get into that in a bit, were in Boston.
At both of those schools, in fact.
What'd you think?
At both of those schools, in fact.
Both of those schools. So tell me about it.
So I moved to New England after having lived in Washington, D.C. I auditioned for the Choral Arts Society of Washington, because I was not singing at all, except for my teammates' weddings. And 29 years old, moved there, and my wife Denise suggested that I stop at we passed by the New England Conservatory because we were house hunting. And she says, you should just go in there and see what they got in there. So I went in there and got an application for the weekend program they have called Continuing Education, went back and sang the national anthem for them. And they asked, had I ever thought about singing opera? And I was like, no. So they put me in their opera studio. So it's kind of a weekend warrior thing. I worked all week. You go there on the weekends. You learn opera scenes. I have no idea what I'm doing, but, they were teaching me everything there. And I got into this operetta in Salem, Massachusetts, seen the role of the devil. While there, Sharon Daniels had a student in that production, heard me sing, and asked me to come make an audition for her school, Boston University Opera Institute. And so I hired a private teacher, learned contrasting arias in different styles, and auditioned for her program, and she offered me a full scholarship. So I started NEC on the weekend program, got into Boston University Opera Institute, quit my job at the age of 30, and started studying with her. And then Stephen Lord heard me from Boston Lyric Opera and gave me the role of the King and Aida about 3 weeks after I started studying. So I'm brand new opera.
People don't know Stephen Lord is a conductor and excellent coach. He was on the show a couple of years ago. He's also, he would tell you, an apple farmer.
Yes.
And he has a big apple farm in New England.
I've been to his farm.
Okay.
It's immense.
In fact, our first 20 minutes of my conversation with Stephen were about apples. They were not about opera at all. So wonderful person in our business. Yeah. So Stephen heard you and understood
that there was something there. They gave me the role of the King and Aida right out the gate. He says, I know you don't know what you're doing, but don't mess this up. So my first role was the King and Aida. And I had never sung in Italian before. I'd never been on stage before. I'd never sung opera before. But that role obviously means a lot to me because that's how I got started. And that was 25 years ago. In fact, Boston Lyric Opera had me back for their gala a few months ago in November, and it was on the same exact day of my opera debut. And that's where I sang Rumpus before I came here to the Met. So it's all kind of connected. But yes, New England was a wonderful place for me to develop as a young artist. There are lots of performance opportunities there, lots of open-minded people that don't mind taking a raw talent and trying to cultivate it. And so, yeah, they're very, very key to my musical development and career. That's where everything started.
So part of New England is the Boston Symphony Orchestra and Tanglewood.
Yes.
Which is sort of their summer program. I don't know if there's a sports connection to Tanglewood. I don't know if you know that.
Is there? No.
Yeah. I'm in New York, no secret about that. And my team for baseball happened to be the Yankees. And the Boston Red Sox, who are an excellent team, I like them. It's not one or the other. But they had a baseball player in 1923 whose name was Babe Ruth. And they let him get away, and he came to the New York Yankees. They built Yankee Stadium, was known as the house that Ruth built. The Yankees went on to become the most successful team in baseball. Well, to the best, but the most successful team in baseball. The Red Sox did not win for a very long time. And then the Tanglewood Festival was being developed, and they approached the New York Philharmonic to be the resident orchestra at Tanglewood. And the Philharmonic stupidly said no. So they went to the Boston Symphony. So Tanglewood is the revenge for Babe Ruth. That's how we do it.
I have another story that you're not aware of.
Go ahead.
Involves the Yankees and the Red Sox.
Okay.
And when I was a young artist at the Met, I was being asked to sing at a lot of events around town after singing with, and Mr. Volpe hooked me up with Mr. Steinbrenner, who wanted me to sing God Bless America.
Let me just define. Joe Volpe was general manager of the Met. George Steinbrenner was the owner of the Yankees.
Correct.
Yeah.
I'd say that as if everyone knows. But I sang God Bless America at the seventh inning stretch of the Yankees games during the playoff series back in 2003, I think it was 4. And I did 2, and I was undefeated. So they had to play the Red Sox. I'd won the first game, I won the second game. They were tied 3-3 with the Red Sox on who was going to win the ALCS. And I had a performance of Aida that night at the Met. And Mr. Volpe would not release me to go sing at the Yankees game. And the Yankees lost to the Red Sox, who went on to win the World Series for the first time in like a millennium. It was like 100 years or something. So full circle. I go back to Tanglewood a few years later, and I'm singing in Tanglewood, and somebody from the Red Sox organization comes to me and says, "We'd love for you to sing at Fenway Park," which is where the Boston Red Sox house is. 17th stretch, God Bless America, when we play against the Yankees. So I go, I do the 17th stretch, I sing God Bless America, the stadium goes wow, and the Yankees won again.
The Yankees or the Red Sox?
No, the Yankees won.
Okay.
At Red Sox Stadium.
Right.
So what happened was, when I did not do the tiebreaker in the Yankee Stadium, the Yankees never called me again.
Uh-huh.
Then the Red Sox called me to sing at their stadium, and the Yankees beat them again. So now the Red Sox never called me either. So I lost out with both of them.
Well, I'm going to stick to baseball just for another minute because I know you're a great football player and lover. I'm a great baseball lover. And I don't know if you know the wonderful baritone Andrew Garland, redheaded guy. Andy is a wonderful artist and teacher now at University of Colorado. And Andy is from near Boston, and he's almost a perfect person. The only problem is he's a Red Sox fan. And when he's not in Colorado, but when he's in the Boston area, they have him come sing at the stadium.
Yeah.
And I just can't listen. I'll hear him sing anything else, but I just cannot. It's strange how deep that runs about baseball.
The Yankees fans and Red Sox fans are the best and worst I've ever been around.
Yeah.
My jiu-jitsu teacher came down to Yankee Stadium for me to sing one of the games. And Mark Oswald was with me, my teacher, the great baritone Mark Oswald.
Yeah.
And my jiu-jitsu teacher is a little bitty guy, but he's a black belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So he can take care of himself. But he wore his Boston Red Sox hat in the low seating of the New York Yankees. And I was afraid he was not going to get out of there alive. It was crazy. So, yeah, I mean, the passion, being from Atlanta, I'm not used to that type of passion because we've never really won anything. We had the Braves for a stretch, but other than that, I've just never seen the true passion of the fan base that I see in New York and in Boston. So I really admire that.
One more thing about baseball. Not so much now, but when I was performance manager at the Met in the 80s and the 90s, the Metropolitan Opera season usually began the third or fourth Monday of September.
Okay.
By which point the Yankees and sometimes the Mets would be in the playoffs. And the World Series, the championship, would be in October to early November. By then, the Met was in full season.
Yeah.
And at that time, the Met season ended around May 1st or 2nd, and the company then went out on tour. In other words, just when baseball was picking up again.
Right.
And there was a very large fan base for opera. There was a very large fan base for baseball. And basically what they did was they would shift from the Metropolitan Opera House in the colder months to the Yankee Stadium and then Shea Stadium at that time in the warmer months. And these were the same people. And I ask this because, Morris, you were an outstanding football player. And in my knowledge, I know that there are many singers who are football fans, but the general public for opera tends to be a baseball base. And I think that's because of the base BASC.
Right.
I think that's because of the protagonism of baseball. There's the pitcher, there's the batter, there are the individual gestures rather than the movement of a team.
Yeah.
With the ball going in one direction than the other. In baseball, you're watching a direct duel, a conflict between two or three people.
Yep.
And each person gets his moment to exceed or fail, excel or fail. And I think that, to me, is why so many opera fans, true opera fans, are also true baseball fans.
That's a very interesting point. I never thought of it that way. I thought it had something to do with the seasons coinciding with.
Also, it doesn't hurt.
I mean, I'm a football guy, and I miss a lot of games because I'm on stage performing. So, yeah. So I thought maybe that was it. But that's another good point. That angle makes a lot of sense. So, yeah.
But let's talk about this because, there are many people in all professions who love sports and football. In your case, you played. You were an All-American.
I did. I tell people all the time that although it is phantasmal in that you think of this jock who became an opera singer, who was out, bashing heads and, in the mud. And then he sees this very refined art form. But athletes and musicians are not very far apart ever. Every professional basketball player I know has made a rap CD or tried to sing an R&B song, I think it's the admiration of that which you can't do really well or what gets you the most attention. But also, athletes, as an opera singer, you're an athlete. Your body is your instrument. You have to train your voice like you train your body to play a game. It takes an incredible amount of mental discipline, intestinal fortitude to walk out on that stage and sing and bear it all, as it does to walk out on the 50-yard line and try to block another 300-pound man who's been training all year to beat you. It takes one's ability to take on coaching, whether it's from a vocal coach or a conductor or a football coach or a coordinator. You have to watch what's happening because in live competition, if a guy moves from here to here, it changes your blocking scheme. If the conductor decides to take this tempo as opposed to this tempo, it changes your breath, how you sing it. If you're working with a different colleague, they may do something different on stage. You have to adapt to the moment. And it all has to happen in real time. So my ability to prepare as an athlete really was a good setup for me to prepare as an opera singer. I think they go hand in hand.
But no blue eyeshadow in football.
You might get run out the locker room, that's for sure.
I'm switching a bit. There's a very famous sports town in the United States, Cincinnati, where the first football team the Bengals were, relatively recent, but the very first baseball team in America was Cincinnati Reds,
really?
Professional. And their opera house and their downtown, it's all clustered together. And I mention this because it's the Cincinnati Opera is the company I'm very close to, and I've done a lot of things there. And it's Cincinnati Conservatory, and I'm very admiring of their administration, of Chris Milligan and Evans Mirages. It's a wonderful team. And you are artistic advisor to Cincinnati Opera.
I am, yeah.
You've performed a lot of roles there. Talk about, was it Evans who brought you in, Evans Mirages, who also worked at Atlanta Symphony? Maybe that's the connection. I don't know.
That was one of the connections in Patty Beggs, Patricia Beggs, who was the CEO before Chris, was also instrumental in that. And I've done lots of work in Cincinnati as, with the May Festival, with the opera, with the symphony, just lots of work as an artist there. And I developed a strong relationship with the community. Tracy Wilson, their outreach person with community engagements, involved me a lot with Opera Goes to Church. And they saw how well my background, being from Atlanta and being a church guy, connected with a lot of the audiences and people in Cincinnati. So it was a nice carryover. And we've done some really wonderful work. I'm leaving there. When I leave here this weekend, I go directly to Cincinnati to start working on a workshop for one of the new projects that we're doing called the Black Opera Project. We're having 3 operas done, back to back to back, on positive Black stories by Black composers, Black librettists, the whole thing. So we're really excited about that project. But that's one of the things that we're working on now. Done some really incredible work there. First-class organization, world-class opera, world-class symphony. And that building that we perform in, I think, was designed by the same people that designed Carnegie Hall. So it's a beautiful building.
The 1870s.
Yeah.
It's an old music hall. It's an old building.
Yeah. It's the oldest opera house in the country, I think, right?
Maybe the Academy of Music in Philadelphia.
Oh, Philly, yeah.
Yeah.
I think they're close, but
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, I love working there, and I'm there this summer again in Rigoletto. So I'm looking forward to that too. Yeah.
So I want to tell listeners something more about Cincinnati to give a context. And it occurred to me that in a certain way, Cincinnati has some of the virtues of Atlanta. It's not as minority, whatever term we want to use. It is a lot more mixed. But it is a city that historically is very corporate. And it has big corporations there that support the arts and believe that having the arts. Cincinnati used to be the 6th largest city in America. Now it's small. Yeah. Now it's a small, nice city. But but with big corporations that support the second oldest opera company in America after the Met, the second oldest symphony after the New York Philharmonic, in the southern part of Ohio, right on the Ohio River, separating Ohio from Kentucky.
Well, from the south.
Therefore, although people forget that Kentucky was not fighting for the South in the Civil War, but effectively it's a very southern state.
Yeah.
But it's a state from which many African Americans, or as Larry Brownlee always tells me, persons of African descent, came across the Ohio River to freedom.
Yeah.
And that one of the main routes, in addition to Maryland, of what's called the Underground Railroad, was out of Kentucky and into Ohio.
Yep.
So there's a wonderful museum right at the river, right close to the baseball stadium, of, I don't know if it's called the Museum, African American Museum, or Slave History, but it's about that story.
Yeah.
And the wonderful writer Toni Morrison was from near there. And a lot of her books and novels are set in that area, about Black people who left the oppression of the South for the relatively less oppression of the North, although there's plenty there too. But there's a wonderful food market in Cincinnati. And it was founded in 1852. I'm forgetting the name of the market, but it was a place where Black farmers went and were able to sell food to anyone in a way that they were not able to do just across the river in Kentucky. So it's an interesting microcosm of American history.
Yeah.
So therefore, very interesting, and I think great that they're developing this project of positive stories for Black opera.
It's the right place to do it, right time. Yeah, it works out great.
Yeah. So I get to a lot of things around the world, but one thing that I was very sorry not to get to, because I heard nothing but fantastic stories from people who performed in it, members of the audience who went to it, was Opera Goes to Church, which was something you organized and performed it along with many colleagues. Tell me all about that. A lot of people would hold their iPhones up and film it, and I would see bits of it in New York. I wanted to be there in the place. Talk about Opera Goes to Church.
So I think there are two things. There's Opera Goes to Church, which was developed by Tracy Wilson, where I performed at the church. She would bring opera singers in that had church backgrounds, and we would sing opera arias. We sing gospel music, and on one year in particular, when Morris did his first one, they lost their drummer at the church, and they were scrambling trying to find the drummer. We're on the way to rehearsal. And I said, Tracy, if they need a drummer, I can play. She's like, no, Morris, they really need a professional drummer. I was like, you don't think I can play? So they let me go play the rehearsal, and they called the other drummer and said, we don't need you now, Morris is here. So that kind of formulated a whole thing of, me knowing musicians in the opera world that played. I think the concert you're referring to might be Morris and Friends, where Larry Brownlee, Thomas, and Jackie Eccles, and Will Liverman, and all of us were in town.
That's
Reggie
the one.
Smith. Yeah, so that was the opposite. It was not Opera Goes to Church, but it wasn't Church Comes to Opera. It was Morris and Friends, where I had a collection of world-class opera singers who also had a very strong church background. And the first half of the concert, we had the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra. We had a conductor, I think Joseph Young was a conductor, and we just did opera arias and scenes, and Russell did Pagliacci, and I did
Russell Thomas,
Russell Thomas, I did Il Lasciato Spirito, Come da Cielo Precipita, I believe, La Calugna, and Larry Brownlee did A Mes Amis, and, we just, Jacqueline Eccles did Traviata. It was just a really first-class, high-art concert for the first half. And then Damian Sneed, the pianist,
wonderful musician, arranger.
Right. He's the only person I think who's a virtuoso at classical and gospel music, because he can do both. So he played a transition piece where he went from classical to gospel, and then the band appeared on stage, gospel band, Hammond organ, piano, drum set, the whole thing, and a big choir was there, and they started singing gospel music. And then each song was led by an opera singer. So we went back to church. We went back to our roots, and it was a wonderful, wonderful concert where you got to see the full gamut, the full array of what God has blessed us with. And that was the whole purpose of it. God has blessed us with His talent. Here's what he blessed us with. This is from whence it came. You get to see it all at one time. So it was really a wonderful concert. Yeah.
So a couple of years ago, I'm guessing now, it was in February, so right around now, a couple of years ago, I had the great thrill and honor to have a guest on this program, Twinkie Clark.
Oh, my God.
I know.
You did an album together, yeah.
And Twinkie Clark of the Clark sisters, but she's sort of the musical foundation. She's the Bach of that family. Yeah. She plays the organ. Her musical range and knowledge and comprehension is like Damien Sneed. And the two of them did a program together. She had not been in New York for 38 years. And it was a very cold night in February, and I, of course, went. And but I had her on the show before. And it was just so fascinating because I say this line all the time, but it's gospel in my family, that Duke Ellington said there are only two kinds of music, good music and the other kind. And and Twinkie Clark basically at her organ, sitting and talking to me, but her hands and feet going the whole time she was talking to me. Music sort of emanated from her body, her pores, and so on. And she was commenting with her hands and then separately with her feet based on the words that she was saying. And then she'd hear me say something and respond with her hands.
Yeah.
And it was just the most dazzling thing. And Damien Sneed was involved in that program to bring her back. But I mention that because for a lot of reasons. But one is Lawrence Brownlee, whom you referred to, is our tenor friend. And he, big football fan. I don't even go there with him on that one, but big football fan. But the thing is, many years ago, I teach a class at New York University, and I had him come, and he started, in addition to talking about his wonderful opera singing, we got a little bit into gospel, and he used the word that I understood but didn't really understand. I wanted him to explain, and I'm going to say the word, maybe you can tell me what you think, melisma.
Oh.
That how in opera you can bring the melisma, but you don't bring it the way you do to gospel.
Gospel,
What is the melisma? And did you guys in your concert, Morris and Friends, bring it or don't bring it?
So I'm not really a great gospel singer in that type. I'm a powerful feeling type of singer. Larry Brownlee, I always tell him he's a cheat code because he grew up in the Church of God in Christ, and the style of gospel that he grew up singing was all about, we call it runs, but melismas, ornamentations, how you can take the melody and decorate it with lots of notes that ornament and complement the musical phrase you're trying to sing. And because he's trained to do that in gospel since he was, a kid, doing it in Rossini is almost like unfair to the rest of the world because Larry can do what you hear him do with Rossini, and you determine that it is electrical and unreal and just the machine gun clarity that he utilizes is what he would do on Sunday morning, like all the time. So it's like, that's not fair, but he's just so wonderful at it. And, but that's what it is. It's accentuation, it's ornamentation, it's, I can't think of all the right words because I really don't sing that style of music, but it's just adding flavor to the line and making it sound more soulful and more musical. And Rossini wrote that type of thing or allowed that type of thing. And he's just amazing at it. There are a lot of people that can sing like that. There are a lot of people that don't sing opera that really could if they wanted to because they have that agility in their voice, And by the way, he's also a pretty doggone good church bass player too, bass guitar. Mm-hmm. He played bass at that concert with me, and I played the drums. So it was really cool to do that. So.
Was it recorded in any formal way apart from everyone holding up their phones?
I think there is a recording that Tracy's working on, but I don't know when it's going to be released yet.
I got to hear that. I am historically and currently a huge lover of gospel music.
Oh, good. Yeah.
And more than any little white boy you'll ever meet from New York City, I'm the one.
You're the one?
You asked me, what did Dorothy Norville sing in 1958 and blah. I could do it.
Is that right?
But among the many great gospel artists, people say, who's your favorite? I don't have one, although I always loved everything Albertina Walker sang. But Shirley Caesar, Pastor Shirley Caesar from North Carolina, it's just a different thing because she avowedly is not, quote, only a singer, but also a pastor.
Right.
And I like to read her and read about her and so on. And recently came across a quote that just turned my mind around about all singing, not just gospel. Because as she's a believer in the word, in the Bible, in the stories of the Bible, she said, the word is a given and it does not change. It's I who bring the music.
Right.
And when I suddenly realized that, because you could have notes on a page, but then the way the singer, the instrumentalist, whomever, interprets the notes on the page, that's the bringing of the music. Because, I don't know, I always think of singing in many contexts as about the music and the words. So that, for example, in popular music, if you took an Ella Fitzgerald, she would do entirely different things with the same lyrics than would Billie Holiday or Sarah Vaughan or Peggy Lee or anyone, Rosemary Clooney, whoever was singing those songs. But in song repertory, in opera and lieder, in French art song, in American classical music of all kinds, I believe that, yes, the words may be the same on the page, but sound very different and mean different things depending who is doing the singing. But having read Pastor Shirley Caesar saying the word is always the word, now I'm turning all this over my head. Do you have any thoughts on what she said?
I think she's exactly right, but I think we're talking about not quite exactly the same thing, because the word is the word, and if you want to go gospel, which I'm not a scholar on, I'm not a scholar in anything, but my dad's a Baptist preacher, right? And there can be another Presbyterian minister or Lutheran or a Catholic minister to preach about the same part of the scripture with the exact same message, but the delivery is totally different. All right, so it doesn't change the scripture. It doesn't really change the meaning of it, but the delivery is different. You've heard Black preachers, say the Lord's Prayer, when they're praying. And it sounds a lot different than what we would say it as if we were just speaking before someone. They add flavor to it. They add emotion to it. They put seasoning on it, and I think that's the same thing with music, Now, within classical music, there's a certain framework where you're allowed to operate only within that framework. But I think that you can say that the music that Verdi wrote or Mozart wrote is always going to be there. The dots are going to be the same, no value on the page. But if you hear Larry sing it or Pavarotti sing it, or Placido Domingo sing it, you'll hear three different ways it's sung because of the interpretation or how they feel about it or how they're emoting or just the style that they choose to deliver the text. So I think that that's what the differences are. So Shirley Caesar is exactly right, but so is the music, and so is one's ability to interpret that music and deliver it in their own way. That's why it's beautiful to have different artists approach the same score or hear someone sing the same role, because it's always going to be different. My Rumpus is going to be different than the next guy's Rumpus. I play him same words, same meaning, but my expression, the way I play him, it's going to be different than the other people, But I'm more of an aggressive guy, and I played in front of 70,000 people screaming. And, I've been assigned with taking this guy who's been working out all year and moving him in a direction that he doesn't want to go against his will, with people screaming at me to do it and guys depending on me to do it. So when I play Rumpus and I realize that Rodimus is the traitor, all of a sudden he's now the enemy. But when I see the Ethiopians pleading for their lives to the king who's kind of about to break, I remind him that, no, don't do that, bro. And this is why you shouldn't, because if they get another chance, they're going to kill you. You need to think about that before you do it. And that's how I play it. So.
there's a broad terminology. There's the wonderful scholar Henry Louis Gates, who produced a series called The Black Church, and many series, but most recently The Black Church. And I realized that we can refer to the Black Church, but that's not a monolith either.
It isn't.
And you were just mentioning different denominations, and Larry Brownlee, you said, is United Church of Christ.
Church of God in Christ.
Church of God in Christ. Okay.
Yeah.
And I forget what Twinkie Clark is, but I know that
Church of God in Christ.
also
I'm Baptist, so yeah.
Just musically, though, I'm not talking about how religion is observed, but just musically, these are all very different iterations
Absolutely.
of the same expression, of the same
Absolutely.
love. Yeah.
You should hear Daniel C. He has a video on YouTube we'll talk about where he talks about just the different sounds. Like if you hear this in Detroit, where the Church of God in Christ is really big, it'll be played this way. If you hear it down in Georgia, where I'm from, very Baptist Southern, it'll be played this way. If you hear it out in California, where Under Crouch was, you'll hear it this way. And the Walter Hawkins version,
and James Cleveland,
or Chicago style with there's so many different styles, not within our music, so within our churches, within our religion, within our culture. So same message, same song, even just a different interpretation of how it's presented. So
now with the preachers, because Reverend C.L. Franklin was the father of Aretha Franklin.
Yes.
And he was, let's say, friendly with Clara Ward, who was one of the great gospel singers who influenced Aretha and many others. But Reverend C.L. Franklin made a lot of money selling LPs, recordings of his famous sermons.
I didn't know that.
Oh, my goodness. That's where a lot of... When they would travel to the South, he and his daughter Aretha and the other two sisters, Aretha would sing, but they'd be out front selling records.
Oh, wow.
But not of Aretha, but of Reverend C.L. Franklin and his sermons.
Wow.
Especially one about an eagle. And his use of the double consonant is right out of Italian opera.
Really?
And it always struck me that when there was a double N or a double L or a double M, that he would hum and resonate those letters in such a way that the crowd would go wild.
Did he also do what we call hooping at the end, the singing type of sermon, where he gets to the end and get into a rhythm and start singing? Yeah.
And Aretha, I think she didn't imitate that, but she, being a genius, heard what he did and how he got effects, and then used that in her own way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. By the way, the best definition of talent I've ever heard came from Aretha Franklin. They said to her, "What's your definition of talent?" And she said, "It means you've got something going on." I love that.
Fair enough, Aretha. Fair enough. God rest your soul. Fair enough.
She's right.
Yeah.
But there's a simplicity, but a complete accuracy of that statement. You got something going on.
It doesn't need to be complicated. Yeah. It's pretty much that. Pretty much that. Yeah.
Yep. So let's move to Los Angeles, where you've had a lot of work in the years and a lot of presence. When I introduced this program today, I started by saying hello to people in Los Angeles. And James Conlon and the Los Angeles Opera. Talk about that world, because James is an old friend of mine for 40 plus years. I've not had anyone on my program yet from LA Opera, not for lack of trying. But it's a wonderful company that I know very, very well.
Yeah.
And Christopher Kelch is now the general manager, and he's moving it in very modern, interesting directions.
Yeah.
But a large part of your formation came in LA.
Yeah.
So please talk about that.
Maestro Conlon met me at the Metropolitan Opera. His wife heard me in Aspen sing my first Verdi Requiem and had me sing for him when I was a young artist.
Jennifer, who's a wonderful teacher.
Wonderful teacher, soprano and vocal coach and linguistic coach. Incredible. And he had me sing some parts for him before a show here at the Met when I was a young artist. And the first role he gave me was Osmine in the abduction from Seraglio by Mozart. And that was at the Cincinnati May Festival. So you see the connection, Cincinnati, me.
James conducted often at the Bay Festival.
Yeah. Yep. And then the next show he gave me was the same show with the Ravinia Festival, Chicago Symphony, which introduced me to that market. But, Maestro Conlon is one of the most loyal, smartest, most accomplished, most respected musicians, conductors in the world. And I learned so much from him, and I've learned a lot about opera from him. He's an encyclopedia. He's like the old school guy that can tell you why the composer wrote it in this key and why he did this and why this inflection is here. And you have to, if you notice, they put 2 dots over this note instead of 1 dot. But he's just an encyclopedia. So I learned so much from him. And he's given me lots of opportunities, and I've tried my best to capitalize upon those so he can give me more chances. And being the music director at LA Opera, he was able to utilize my talent. I was able to go out there and do a lot of work. And that's still one of my favorite places to sing because LA has so much to offer. I spent a lot of time in my early career doing a lot of firsts out there. But, the level of artistry at that company is second to none. The level of music making out there because he's there is second to none. Their music staff, a lot of them are Met trained or came from here or oscillate between the two. They all know each other. First rate across the board, incredibly high musical production. It's just great. They got a great orchestra. They have a great general manager. Their music staff is great. I love singing there, and it's just one of my favorite companies.
You know that, unless I'm completely mistaken, you and James share a birthday?
We do, March the 18th.
That's right. I'm right then. Okay. And the late, wonderful Margaret Juntwaite, who was for many years the broadcaster of the Metropolitan Opera.
Okay, didn't know that.
March 18th, baby. And a lot of good people. It's interesting how certain days capture them. Yeah. One of them is March 18th. Now,
that day, huh?
You, like other Black artists I've spoken to, there are some who have sung a lot in Porgy and Bess because the work was there at a time when it was not available elsewhere. And other artists I've spoken to have avoided Porgy and Bess specifically because they did not want to be sort of stereotyped into one opera when you could be singing Wagner and Mozart and Verdi and all kinds of other things. But relatively late, I think you came to Porgy, and you did it at La Scala.
I've not been known for being one that's afraid to take chances, but I was at the Atlanta Symphony talking to the concertmaster, and he said, "What's next for you?" I said, "Well, I'm going to La Scala to sing my first Porgy." He said, "Oh, wait." He said, "Oh, great." He said, "Wait a minute, your first Porgy?" I said, "Yeah." At La Scala? I said, "Yeah." He says, "Good luck." I'm like, what? So, but yeah, that was in 2016. So by then, I'd already been singing for 17 years as a professional, and I'd only sung mostly German and Italian repertoire, except for Joe and Showboat, which didn't happen until 2012. So I'd been 13 years in business by then. So, first of all, there's enough people already doing it, and it was great. The problem early on was that whomever was casting never could look at Porgy and consider that voice, if you can sing Porgy, you can sing Wotan. But if you can sing Porgy, you absolutely can sing Wotan, because I've sung Porgy, and it's a challenge. It requires, if you're going to do it well, it requires someone that is complete command of their voice and has the patience and the pacing and the understanding of the tessitura, and the understanding of how to sing through the passaggio, and understanding how the role starts off like Sarastro, as Gordon Hawkins told me, and ends up like Amonasro, and it covers everything. It really starts off like Sarastro, and it goes all the way to the end. The hardest part's at the end, the highest part's at the end. So,
True. Oh, Lord, I'm on my way is very high. I never thought about that.
Yeah, but before that,
the trio.
Or the Bess, so where's my Bess? That trio, incredibly high. There's E, F, 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 F. It just sits right up in that top range. So, and then, oh Lord, I'm on my way requires that as well. But it starts off like a hymn, So, but the buzzard song, that's like, there's nothing in the Italian repertoire that hard. Zaccaria in the Bucco, maybe it's not even as tough as Porgy. But the point is, I stayed away from it until La Scala said, "We want you to sing it," and then you don't say no to them but once. So I took it on and I really enjoyed it. And I think I did a wonderful job with it. I'm different. I'm a real bass that actually has a really good upper extension, thank God. So my porgy is going to be different than some of the porgies that they're used to here. And I've been asked to sing it a few other times. Haven't been able to do it scheduling wise. It'd be interesting if the big house asked me to do it. I think I would. But if I do it anymore, it's going to be very select because I did it at La Scala. I did the critical edition at the University of Michigan for study purposes. We did the whole thing. I did it at Cincinnati Opera, which is my first fully staged one. Then I did it at Atlanta Opera right when the pandemic hit. So I got 3 in and then I was out. But yeah, I enjoy singing the role. It's great. I did it in Vienna. Did it with Alan Gilbert in where were we? In Germany at the
Hamburg.
Hamburg, yeah.
Yeah.
At the new Hamburg, yeah. The orchestra there. Is it Philharmonic? What is it called?
The Elbe Philharmonic.
Elbe Philharmonic, yes. Yep.
Yeah.
We went on tour with that 2 summers ago. So I've done it. I'm very familiar with it. I enjoy singing the work, but you know, I'm now getting Wagner opportunities and more variety to sing. So it's kind of it will have to present itself at the right time. So.
Am I correct that you met Todd Duncan?
I did. When I was singing with the Choral Arts Society.
Please tell our audience who Todd Duncan was.
Todd Duncan was the first Porgy in Porgy and Bess. He's the original Porgy and Bess. And when I met him, I think he was 92 years old and completely blind. And he gave me a coaching because Norman Scribner was like, you need to go meet this guy. He's right here in town. We don't know what to do with your voice. I literally had just started trying to sing. And I did a coaching lesson with him. And at the very end of that lesson, he played these notes. Bum, ba-dum, bum, bum, ba-dum, bum, bum, bum. He says, you know what that is? I said, no, sir, I don't. Well, that's a tune called Old Man River. One of my colleagues, Paul Robeson, made that song famous. And you have a voice just like his. You need to learn it because you're going to make a lot of money singing it one day. He's right.
Wow. You know, when I was 9 years old, I sat on Paul Robeson's knee.
What's that?
When I was 9 years old, I sat on Paul Robeson's knee, and he sang Joe Hill to me.
Oh, wow.
Talk about life-changing.
Wow.
Just to hear that voice right next to my little ear.
Right next to your ear, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Really extraordinary. You mentioned that you sang Osmin from the Entführung aus dem Serail at LA Opera,
yeah.
But you are also very, very well known for another Mozart-based role, Sarastro. That, you know, as much, maybe more than even Ramphis and the King.
Yeah.
I think the role that when I say Morris Robinson to people, they say, oh, he's the great Sarastro. But in doing my research, when you began at the Met, you were in many productions of Die Zauberflöte in German and The Magic Flute in English, but in a smaller role. And eventually you graduated to Sarastro.
Yeah.
How did that happen? How did you learn the role? And what's it like that they'll say to you the way you're doing King or Ramphis, today you're doing it in English, today you're doing it in German? Because the Met does it in both.
Yeah, so it's an interesting story. I started out as second arm man. Mike Levine hired myself and Garrett Sorensen to sing first and second arm man. We were young artists, and at the time he had Kurt Moll and Huncho Yoon at his disposal to sing Sarastro. So there's no place for me in that lineup. And but he also wanted me to learn it while it was happening. So while I was doing second arm man, Kurt Moll, the great German bass, would teach me Sarastro, and those me. And the Beethoven Ninth and all kinds of things. I had coaching with him every day. And I think Huncho Yoon started off and then Kurt Moll sang it. And I think the following year, we were supposed to do another opera, and I was cast to sing, I think, Bottom and Midsummer Night's Dream. And they canceled it and replaced it with Magic Flute. And they said, Robinson, you're up. So that was his roster for that production. And I crashed and burned. It was just, the first performance was just too much for me. I think it was just too much happening too early for me. And after that first performance, it evened out. And I got better. And then I got settled. And I think I sang that role of those 120-something performances. A good chunk of those was the rostros at the Metropolitan Opera, both English and German. One season, I was cast to do the German and the English simultaneously.
Wow.
And I think I told Peter Gell this earlier. I said, I think you guys are always trying to test my intellect because you want to see if I can handle these very difficult projects. This is what you know. So I said, well, several years ago, I was singing German magic flute and English magic flute at the same time. So I would get to the theater, same costume, same role, same notes. It'll be, my brothers, here in the Temple of Wisdom, we have dedicated ourselves, or eingeweiht in der großen Götter. And I was the only one that did it. So I had no help, you know. It's like I'm looking around like, okay, which one is this one? You know, so but I passed, you know, and I think I did 2 more German productions and then several of the English productions. And you know, they're moving away from that now. I've sung so many of them. I think they're giving some of my little brothers a chance. So Pei and Solomon and those guys are getting a chance to do it.
Solomon,
so it's kind of
Howard,
cool.
Yep.
Yeah. Kind of watch them, you know, pass it along.
So the Magic Flute, Die Zauberflöte, to me, it's an opera I saw very early. It's an opera I've worked productions on. It's an opera that I'm not a singer, but I actually studied those arias in Hermann Fry, the Papageno arias. And so I know it well, and I teach it all the time. It's one of the operas I'm most called upon to teach. And when the Met began its HD series, they began with Die Zauberflöte, and I was the lecturer before. And so I know it well, but I always find it a challenge to teach that opera because it is about everything, but also, in my view, it's about what's not expected, or the assumptions that we make about someone come not to be true. And most specifically, the Queen of the Night in Sarastro. Because in many productions, she's the Queen of the Night, and he's daylight and radiance and sunshine and illumination and knowledge and positivity. But his music sounds so nighttime, and her music sounds so daytime.
Interesting.
And that her music is thrilling. It's a 12-minute role, but you don't have a woman who can sing it. You can't do the Magic Flute. And Catherine Lewick, who does it a lot, does it in both German and English. And she's thrilling at it, but so thrilling in a way that you have to say, wait a minute, this is the bad guy.
I know.
And that this guy going on and on and on at his long meetings is the good guy.
you want to know terrifying, which I've done. You probably have the numbers, but I've done this terrifying scenario a lot here at the Met. Have Catherine Lewick sing the Queen of the Night aria with all the high defs, I guess, and hear the crowd roar after she's done, and then you got to come out and sing in Diesen Heiligen Hallen.
But that's what I mean.
Like, God, no, sorry, why did you do this to me? And then I get to bow after her in the curtain call because my role is hers. And at 1 year, I was like, I'm not going out after her, guys. So, you know, but she's amazing at it. You know, Mozart didn't do Sarastro any favors, but I've actually been successful because I can actually read a crowd back down and settle things within Diesen Heiligen. But it's a tough order to try to follow that thing, especially when she's singing it. So.
But also looking at the score, that the two characters are at the extremes, whereas the other people, the Paminas, the Taminos, the Papagenos, are in the middle, and the 3 ladies are 3 different voices. And it's as if we're teaching the whole and describing the whole world, and your character is actually the gold standard. And in the current, or the Julie Taymor production, he dresses in gold. And she's dressed in black, and she's crazy and everything that she is. And it's very exciting musically. But when I teach the opera to people ahead of time, I always say, pay attention to him, because he's the one that we follow for our human and ethical behavior. And they say, well, but he just sort of goes on and lectures a lot.
Did you see my movie, Magic Flute?
Did I see what?
Did you see the movie I made, Magic Flute, that came out last year?
I did not see that. You made a film of the Magic Flute? I
made a full movie, It's a real movie. It's not a musical. It's actually a movie. We shot it in Munich at the Barbarian Movie Studios, and it came out last year. I think it's on Hulu. It's on YouTube. It's on Prime. You can watch it now. It was in movie theaters. Released in theaters in Europe. It was released a short time in movie theaters in America, but you can go watch it now. It's called The Magic Flute.
No mention.
2023. You'll see me on the front of it, along with Rolando Villazon is in it. Sabine, I can't remember her last name. The wonderful soprano sang "Queen of the Night." Catherine Lewick was actually up for that, and she ended up having a child.
She did.
So we were supposed to do it in Palm Springs together, Palm Beach Opera together, and she ended up having to pull out. I went on to Munich to shoot the movie, and she stayed behind and had her child. And I think we met back up on stage eventually again. But yeah, it's a great movie. Just check it out.
Listeners can go search on YouTube or on Adagio and enter Fred Plotkin, Catherine Lewick, and find my conversation with her that I did a couple of years ago, where she spoke about the challenges of pregnancy and how it affects the voice. And she very particularly experienced it because the current new Met production by Simon McBurney, I believe that's the first name, it's a wonderful production that I first saw and taught in 2018 at Aix-en-Provence, and Catherine Lewick was in that production actually pregnant. So the staging, she was 8 months pregnant. The staging was done with the Queen of the Night in a wheelchair because she didn't want to be walking and running around when she was 8 months pregnant. But she had the baby soon thereafter. But the blocking, the staging has remained. So in the current Met production of it, the Queen of the Night is still in a wheelchair, even though Catherine Lewick doesn't need the wheelchair anymore.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that's how it stays. Morris, there's so much more I would want to ask you, but a question that I always ask my guests, my admirers such as yourself, is what have I left out that I should have asked you?
I mean, look, man, it's been a long time I've been doing this thing. You and I have been wanting to talk for a long time, but you can't cover it all. You can always have me back. I'd love to come back. I got a show tomorrow. So
all right.
I don't like to use all my voice out the day before, but no.
But I will ask you one more thing, because it's something you and I emailed about a couple of years ago.
What was that?
I think it was with Russell Thomas that I came up with this idea that I want to see a black ring. In other words, a recording or opera and concert in which all the artists, at least the singers, maybe the conductor as well, are black persons of African descent. And because people said to me, it's not possible to have a black cast of Wagner singers, I said, of course it is. And I immediately drafted sort of a sketch of who would be in what roles. And I remember I wrote to you and I said, I've given you 3 roles. You wrote back, you said, I want 4.
I didn't say that, did I?
You were the only person I gave more than 1 role.
Yeah, ask for more.
Hunding and Fasolt and Hagen.
Oh my God.
And you wrote back because there are different operas in the ring. Yeah. You said I want 4.
Well, you know,
but you didn't say to me what the 4th one was.
I don't know yet, but I've often been told I should sing Hunding. I've been told by everyone that I'll be a really, really good Hagen, which I'm going to do my first one next season. And I've sung Fasolt with LA Opera, LA Phil.
I heard you sing Fasolt with LA. Yeah.
Oh, you saw the one with LA? Did you see the one with the New York Phil? Same with the New York Phil here too, as well.
I heard both.
Fasolt's my thing, yeah. But I'm looking forward to jumping into Hagen.
If you have the chance, I know you were to cast with him long ago. If you ever have the chance to meet up with and study with Matti Salminen and the Finnish bass on the subject of Hagen, he was an extraordinary Hagen. He really.
Eric Halverson as well.
Yes. Eric is wonderful. I would do both. But there was something, because you're tall.
Yeah. And Matti's a big man. Yeah.
Matti Salminen, who was very tall, Finnish, used his height in wonderful ways, because it was not just about looming over everybody else. It was just about that Hagen, next to little tiny Albrecht, his father, somehow he made that power dynamic happen through the height, not through the music. And it's these are all great roles. And Russell Thomas, Zygmunt, Angel Blue, Sieglinde, you as Hunding. How's that for an act one? Well, now,
I'll take it.
now, seriously, now that I'm mentioning this, and I mean this in all seriousness, and then we'll conclude, I think that you 3, Angel Blue, Russell Thomas, and you, can develop Act 1 as a 65-minute concert program. There are only 3 singers, there's no chorus, All three of you get fantastic music. Angel, I'll work with her on the character part because she's very pious, which is, I love Angel Blue. I adore that. But it'll be a bit of a stretch to get past some of the character issues of Sieglinde. But I think that if we put it in terms of her character more than anyone else in the Ring cycle is about love and about the power of love versus force and power, that Wotan and others are about brute force. And Brunhilde learns from Sieglinde, not the other way around. Brunhilde learns from Sieglinde about the power of love. And ultimately, it's Sieglinde's music that concludes the cycle 17 hours later.
Wow.
But it's the last music of the whole cycle. Wagner, at that moment, says, children, it's love that will prevail, not power and force.
Every time I think that I've done everything I want to do in this business, somebody mentions something like this, and I go, because I get excited to learn new things. And Hagen really, I got to get into it. I'm looking forward to it. You know?
Hagen definitely, because he's the one who has the last line, spoken line, where he reaches for the ring and it evades him and goes into the rhyme, and everybody goes, and then Sieglinde's love theme comes back and tells us what the real story is. But really, now that I think about it, you, Russell Thomas, and Angel Blue doing a 65-minute program, I want to see that in about 2 years at the New York Philharmonic.
I think it's that long to learn it, but I'll do it again.
In about 2 years.
Okay.
I'll make the appointment.
Well, Dudamel will be there, so I just did Wagner with him. Maybe he'll be open to it. So,
okay, all Morris, right. You are a wonder, hardest working man in opera, and I really appreciate everything you do for the art form, for your colleagues, but also for the music.
Thank you. I really appreciate hearing that. It means a lot.
As Pastor Shirley said, the word is the word, but then it's the music.
Right.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Take care.